Mary. That's just beautiful. I wanted to, Mary's the little thing there that she just said just pushed out of my mind the thought I was wanting to share about what Dee Dee was saying. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. And if you don't shut your aura back down, you'll have the problem that I discovered the first time I was ever on the platform as a medium. It took me 3 days to get that shut down again after I had opened it up the first time. And so I know what that's about. You need to pull it back in, and shut down again, or you'll be stuck picking up everybody's everything everywhere you go. And you don't want that. And that's very real, what Dee Dee was just saying about shutting it back down. So I wanted to share that. But thank you for that, Mary, that little anecdote that you just told. Today, as you know, I like to talk about scientific things, and I finished all the principles. So now I'm going to talk about something that's very important to all of us. Is there an afterlife? Now, each of us who are spiritualists, we go and get messages, and we have an evidential medium, and we hear from a relative or a friend, and we get that message, and we know from the evidence that the medium has that absolutely the afterlife is real. Person's got to be over there telling that medium these facts and details. But that is subjective. That's our own subjective knowing. It's not objective. And that's where science comes in. All of us know because we've had these messages. We're very aware that this is real. And we, in our fifth principle, we say we know scientifically that the phenomena of spiritualism proves scientifically that the afterlife is real. But it doesn't. The scientific wants objectivity. And we have subjectivity. We have it. We have this experience ourselves. So what do you say to someone when they say they just don't believe in the afterlife? Or they blurt out something really naive like, science has proven there is no afterlife. What do you do with this person? Okay, because we're using subjectivity. No matter how much we personally believe and know, and we can just say, oh, I know this is true. I got a message from this relative of mine, and I know for sure this is absolutely where it is. And when you hear me tell a lot of these stories myself, but it's all mine. It's all subjective. It's all in my head. It's an anecdote. It's a story that I'm telling. How does that person relate to that? Well, it's vicarious. They're relating from where they are. They can't believe me unless they have the same experience. And unfortunately, as we know, working in this field, if they're negative, they're not going to get an experience. If they're saying, okay, I'm going to test this medium, I'm going to see how this works. They come in the room and they destroy all the energy and nothing happens. And they think, see, I knew it. The mediums they're just a bunch of fakes. Where if they'd come in the room believing, well, then they'd get a great message. But because they come, I'm going to see how this is. So for the last 140 years, some of the world's greatest scientists, and I'm going to read this here because I've got it written down, beginning with the formation of the Society of Psychical Research in 1882, great minds like Dr. William James from Harvard, Sir Oliver Lodge, the inventor, along with Tesla, of the radio. And some people think Marconi invented the radio. He stole it, and he lost the trial in the U.S. Supreme Court in 1947. And Oliver Lodge and Tesla won. Now, they were all dead by that time. But the states won the lawsuit finally. And then Nobel laureates like Dr. Charles Robert Richet, Frenchman, who got the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 1913. These scientists and Nobel laureates and stuff actually believe exactly as we do that this science is real. But of course, it's based on their own subjective experiences. And so, but they've collected this pile of evidence, and they've got all this stuff that they piled up. Oliver Lodge spent 30 years in the Society of Psychical Research piling it up, and in 1909 he finally published a book called The Survival of Man. And in that book, he says it's a scientific fact. This is the guy that gave us the radio. This is a scientific fact that the spiritual life continues. Your consciousness survives post-mortem. Of course, the world says, yeah, well, you're a great scientist, but why should we believe you? Because you don't have objective evidence. Well, things have changed. And in the last 30 years, we suddenly do have objective clinical evidence. There's only two kinds of objective evidence that works in science. And one is when you set up a laboratory experiment and you have all these controlled conditions and you do the experiment and then you see the results that you get. But it's all done officially with all the instrumentation and everything else. Well, when people have heart attacks in a hospital, they're often connected to EEG, which is measuring their brain waves. They're connected to an EKG, which is measuring their heart. And we can tell exactly what's going on with them. And recently, Dr. Sam Parnia published a book in 2013 called Erasing Death. Now, Sam is an atheist. He's not a spiritualist. He's not any of these things. He's just a doctor. But he has been able to put people in what we call hypothermic cardiac arrest therapy. Be very careful. If you go to Johns Hopkins, they have hypothermic after cardiac arrest therapy, and it's a whole different ballgame using the same temperatures and everything else, but it's after cardiac arrest. And watch out for that word after, because what we're talking about here is hypothermic cardiac arrest therapy without that word after stuffed in there, where Dr. Parnia can take a person and cool them down below 93 degrees Fahrenheit. And if they're cooled down, their body won't spoil. What happens when you die, physically, when you die, you're at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. And your body will slowly cool down about 2 degrees Fahrenheit, 1 degree centigrade. It'll cool down every hour. And so it takes about 3 hours for your body to get down below 93 degrees Fahrenheit. And in that 3 hours, your cells spoil, okay? They literally spoil. And so if we don't cool you down right away, your physical body is not revivable. We can't bring it back. But if we do cool you down, we can just let you lay there, not breathing, no heartbeat, no circulation for 3 or 4 hours. And then if we warm you back up slowly by recirculating your blood that we've rewarmed, we circulate your blood back into your body, we warm you back up. About the time you reach about 89 degrees Fahrenheit, coming back up from wherever we took you, you'll begin to start to we're coaxing your spirit back into the body. We'll bring you back to life 3 or 4 hours after you were totally stone cold dead. When we do this, there's no loss of physiological things. There's no loss of psychology, no loss of emotions, no loss of mental capacity. The person just comes back and they're here. Now, about 20% of those people who were gone for 4 hours, where did they go? Okay, first off, where did everybody go? They went off to a place called an afterlife. I don't know what else to call it. They went somewhere. Near-death experiencers talk about it. We talk about where we went. But we have this clinical evidence done in many hospitals now where the person has been dead for 4 hours, 3 hours, 2 hours, whatever, and then we bring them back. Well, why do we want to keep them in cold storage like that? Well, so the doctors can figure out what's wrong with their heart. They had this heart attack. They've got a clot. They've got something. The previous procedure was we start CPR, we start trying to pump that heart and make them come back, come on back. We're going to CPR and come on back. Well, what are we doing? The heart quit because it wasn't getting any blood. It wasn't getting any oxygen. And so the heart muscle is just struggling to get along. That's why it had a heart attack. And here we are trying to make the broken pump work. But if we got 4 hours, we can do an MRI on that heart and figure out where the clot is, and then put a shunt in, and then fix the heart so that when we turn the heart back on, the pump will actually work. It'll have oxygen. Everything will work properly. So instead of trying to make a broken pump work, we got time to fix the pump, put it back in there, take it out, put it on the workbench, work on it, bring it back, put it back in. And when we now ask the consciousness to come back into the physical, coax it back into the body, we're reincarnating it, aren't we? We're bringing it back into the body, and then the person comes back to life. 20% of those people have a near-death experience while their brain is flatlining, their brain is not functioning, they're stone cold dead, but their consciousness is off having experiences and recording memories. And those memories that it's recording can be verified by the attending medical staff that, yes, that is what we were doing. And so usually the consciousness is in the upper part of the room watching the cadaver down on the gurney or the operating table. And the person's describing what they saw and what happened and who said what. And the medical staff can verify that. Well, then you've got a real situation. What was that? Where was that consciousness? What was that consciousness doing? Their brain is dead. It's flatlining. Now, basic medical practice for the last 350 years assumes that you have to have an operating brain to have a consciousness. Well, now we have this clinical evidence, and lots of it, that you don't have to have an operating brain for the consciousness to record experiences and to think and to see things. And the consciousness doing this, of course, is up in the top of the room. It's not located in the cadaver, which shows that we are a spirit, a consciousness, which is having a human experience in the physical body. We're a spirit that's restricted to the physical reality that we see here in 3D plus time, or what we call space-time. We're having this experience in the observed physical reality. And when we talk to children who remember their past lives and things, they remember this up till between age 2 to 5, they'll start talking about it. But if we don't recognize it and say, yes, you had a prior life, by age 8 to 10, it goes away. They forget about it. They assimilate into this observed physical reality. And they don't remember that. Well, none of us at our ages remember our past lives because we're more than 8 years old. Catholic churches call it the age of what they call it, forgot the word, the age of, not the end of the age of innocence. They had another name for it. But that's the point in time when we forget about the prior lifetimes and all of the places we've been before, and we come into this life. Well, those scientists who are for 140 years are trying to pile up all this subjective evidence, to have a big pile. We got so much evidence of all this because we got all this anecdotes from all these people who have had experience where they've talked to their relatives who are dead. We know that this is a scientific fact. That's what the church is trying to say. That's what Oliver Lodge was trying to say. Well, we now have objective scientific evidence. And what does it take to be a scientific fact? You need to have objective evidence. First off, whatever your idea is, whatever your premise is, whatever your hypothesis is, and our hypothesis is life, consciousness continues after death. You have to have a logical premise. Well, it's logical that consciousness could continue after death. The next thing you need for a scientific fact is evidence for it, objective evidence, and that's what I'm talking about here. And then the third thing you need for a scientific fact is no evidence against it. So when somebody blurts out, oh, science has proved there's no afterlife, there is absolutely no proof anywhere, never has been, that there's no afterlife. There is no proof. There is no scientific proof for that. So when somebody says that to you, when they say science has proven there's no afterlife, say, and what exact test, clinical evidence, where's that objective evidence that proves that there's no afterlife? Would you please tell me where that is? They will never be able to tell you because there isn't any. It's all based on a presumption that the consciousness requires a functioning brain to support consciousness. That's a supposition. That's an assumption. It's a presumption. It's a when you can't answer something scientifically, you have to figure out some way of explaining the world. And so scientists will often make assumptions and suppositions in order to fulfill the picture that they have of the whole thing, the big picture. And that's what they did. And they did this. I mean, it was obvious to people if you didn't have a brain, you couldn't think, right? If you got a head injury, well, then it's obvious, isn't it, that if you get a head injury, your brain doesn't work. But what if your brain is merely a receiving device, the pineal gland that Didi was talking about? What if your brain is just a receiver like a television, and the consciousness is somewhere else, sending it into that television? Then the consciousness can exist without that television. When you take a sledgehammer and you bust the television, the signal out there that was going to be in the TV is still out there. And your consciousness is like that, and your brain is just a television. It's just a receiving station. It's no more than that. But people believing that the observed physical reality is all that there is, they automatically will come up with, well, if your brain doesn't work, you can't think anymore. No, you can still think. You just don't have the receiving station to generate the reality for you. So we are a spiritual being, a consciousness, having a human or physical experience. And we're occupying this physical cadaver temporarily. And so now that we've shown through this science, and I'll show you the references, and you can go watch some videos on this afterward. At the end of here, I'm going to show you a page that you can copy down, take a picture of. Now that we have this objective evidence, all of this subjective evidence that has been collected by these scientists for the last 140 years suddenly becomes usable. And we've waited 140 years to be able to do this, to have objective evidence that the consciousness survives post-mortem. When you're physically dead, your consciousness is still alive. Having that kind of objective clinical data makes the reality of what we spiritualists have been talking about for a long time very real. It's scientific. And so what we're saying in the fifth principle, that we believe the phenomena of spiritualism, the fact that we have messages from the other side, scientifically proves the afterlife is real. Well, yes, it does. But science, over the years, over 350 years of science, we've learned that if you have objective evidence, the next guy can do it too. And so we have this situation where atheist medical doctors who aren't spiritualists, who don't have to believe, can go and set up a situation where the cadaver is dead and the consciousness is still living beyond that. And so this is something I just wanted to share with you. It's very scientific stuff, and it goes on like this. You know, I spend a lot of time working on these things. And so when somebody says, Science has proven that the afterlife doesn't exist. That's wrong. And you can just see it's physically wrong. Just show me where that is. Would you please show me the experiment that proved that? And they're at a loss. They can't find it. And then you can, I realize this fact. If they don't believe in the afterlife, you're not going to convince them. But science has now got what it needs. Science has the objective clinical evidence from hypothermic cardiac arrest therapy without the word after in there. If you go look at John Hopkins, it'll say after. And that's very important because John Hopkins is talking about something almost the same, but not quite. And the problem there is hypothermic cardiac, after cardiac arrest therapy, they keep the heart pumping. They keep it running. They're still trying to keep the heart running. And there's a lot of doctors who want to believe that when you're very cold like that, that somehow there's oxygen getting to the brain and everything else. But when you're talking about 3 hours of a cadaver being dead, stone cold dead, and then you bring the consciousness back into that cadaver and the person comes back to life, I don't see how they can even start to say, well, the oxygen got there somehow. No, that's what they want to say, that the brain got oxygen somehow. Well, it didn't. It's stone cold dead. So I'm going to show you this little page, and maybe you can all see that. I hope you can see it. Can you see that page? If you want to take a picture of those.
Bring it a little closer, Alan.
Okay, you want to take a picture of those? Does that work? I don't know where the camera is exactly. Can you read it?
Okay, that's better. I think maybe we could type it in the chat.
I can type it in the chat later.
That would help, yes.
But if you can get a picture of it here, that's what I'm trying to let you picture, because you can take a picture of that. No, I don't know where my camera is actually at on here.
Yes, that was as close as you get, so we could see the whole thing. Yeah. So I see Sam Parnia, MD, and Michael Sabon.
Sabon, yeah.
Yeah. Those were the two.
Yeah, and then you've got another one there.
Down the bottom, I didn't see the name of it.
That's just another place that it's also written.
Okay. Yeah, I just got the names. I guess people can start with the names and then do a search.
If you got Parnia, and you look for Erasing Death 2013.
Erasing Death?
Yeah, that's the name of his book, 2013. It's Sam Parnia, MD, 2013, Erasing Death. And Michael Sabom, Sabom, and his is Light and Death, 1998. And then Chris Carter, Science of the Near-Death Experience, copyright 2010, Chris Carter. Those all talk about these things. And the thing they're going to talk about the most is Pam Reynolds, which was 30 years ago. And Pam Reynolds, this was 30 years ago in Texas. And what they did, they drained the blood out of her head for 20 minutes while they were doing the work on an aneurysm. They didn't, in those days, they weren't sure if this was going to work or not, but they cooled her down to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, drained the blood out of her. She was, depending on how you want to define death, she was dead for 47 minutes or 87 minutes, depending on how you want to define it. But she had the blood completely drained out of her head for at least 20 minutes. And while they repaired the aneurysm in her brain, put it all back together. And while they were doing that, while she was flatlining with her brain, they had clicks going on in her ears, click, click, click at 110 decibels, and nothing showing up on the EEG for her brain just flatlining. Well, Pam had a near-death experience, and she went to the other side. She watched the doctors for a little while in the upper part of the room, and then she went off through the tunnel, and she went off to see her relatives, and then she came back. She had a typical near-death experience. This was in 1991. And that started this whole business. It was a successful surgery. Everything worked fine, but Pam was obviously dead for at least 20 minutes, stone cold dead. When you got clicks like that in your ear and there's nothing showing up in your EEG and your brainstem, the brain's not functioning. It's just totally dead. this is where you'll get some doctors will say, well, the brain will start to deteriorate after 20 minutes. They get that 20 minutes from that Pam Reynolds thing. They're trying to keep their materialist viewpoint of the world together and saying that everything is physical. And it isn't. Where is that consciousness? They've not yet been able to define consciousness as a physical thing, and it isn't. It's totally exists in another dimension, and that's a whole other subject. We want to talk about dark energy and where we only see 4% of the energy that's out there. We call it light energy. We see 4% and 96% of the energy in the universe we can't even discern. And I'm sure that 96% has plenty of room for consciousness and consciousness survival and the places they want to call heaven and everything else to exist. So we don't know exactly the science of these things, but it's up to the parapsychologists to determine all of that. And as they advance this science, we will. But I want you to understand, we now have, and Erasing Death by Sam Parney is a good place to go. There's also some videos. Let's see, there's a video on it. You can just go online and put in Dr. Sam Parnia and look for videos, and the videos will pop up, and you'll find one where he's talking about this stuff that was done in 2019. In the fall of 2019, he did a video. He's talking about this stuff, and he discusses it, and he says right on the video, he says, I'm an atheist, but what's going on here, really? Obviously, the consciousness can survive for an hour after the person is stone cold dead. So it's up to you to decide. So in 2 hours, does it then cease to exist, or does it last for eternity? You think about it, he says. What is that? You could say either way. You say, well, obviously, if it can last for an hour, it can last for eternity. Or you could say, no, it's going to have to decay because, and even the guy he's talking to says, well, we didn't have an existence before we were born. So how does he know we didn't have an existence before we were born? But he says that right in the video. And he assumes that's a fact. And that's an assumption again. We did have an existence. We are a spiritual being having a human experience. We're in this cadaver for a little while, and then we move on. And that's what makes Dee Dee and me feel pretty good when we realize we're going to get rid of these cadavers eventually. We won't need our hips and our knees and our eyes and all this other stuff that we have. She's got a torn retina. I've got new lenses because of cataract. And, I got my vision back. All these things, we won't have to be repairing these broken down old bodies anymore. That's one of the other things that's really good about what we know. But for the time being, Medicare and things like that pick up some of this stuff and do it for us. So that's what I wanted to share with you. What do you say to them? There's the science behind it. Go watch Sam Parnia's videos, and you'll be fascinated. You realize medical science has now shown that the afterlife, or what we call postmortem consciousness survival, is real. It's scientific fact. Okay, one other thing. The scientists say, but extraordinary things need extraordinary proof. Well, then their extraordinary proof is for them to prove materialism, which we've shown all 6 of those basic principles of materialism are false. Therefore, it doesn't exist at all. Our whole materialist thing is folded. It's not true. It's what we use, and it's 3D plus time is a beautiful system. We use it all the time in engineering, but it's an approximation. It's not the truth. It's an assumption. It's an approximation. We can prove that. Now we have objective clinical evidence that the afterlife exists. We can prove it exists for at least 3 or 4 hours. And if it lasts that long, what would stop it from continuing? And if these scientists say, well, it has to stop, then the question is, and who is making it stop? Is that God? what is that that's making it stop? What is that enforcing force in the universe that's going to make consciousness cease after 3 hours or 4 hours or next week? Or it would have to be a God, wouldn't it? Well, they don't want a God. So there they are. They're stuck. They would have to have a God stopping the consciousness. So if consciousness can last 4 hours, I guess it can last for eternity. And if it can last for eternity, then we've been here for an awful long time. And we're a spiritual being having a human experience.